Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. What I wanted to do today is take a look at the meta from patch 3.21 and assess what's going to work for 3.22 as potential league starters. What we're going to do here is have a look at two specific resources. The first one is PoE.Ninja's snapshot of the league meta on day 4, and the second one is based upon the snapshot on day 10 that I took. So this is going to be a look at the trade softcore meta. Obviously, it's a little bit different in hard modes. If you're interested in solo self-found, the day 4 meta will probably be more accurate because there's just fewer copies of the very rare uniques early on. And if you're looking for inspiration for hardcore or ruthless, there'll be some of these builds that you can definitely cut out of your consideration. Methodology is that we use Grinding Gear Games' publication of the ladder, which is a list of the top 15,000 characters by XP. This information is scraped by the website PoE.Ninja. They also look at active traders, and they also look at people who opt into their account but aren't in the top 15,000 by XP. Combined, this gives a fairly good sense as to a broad strokes overview of high level play. Now this will miss a lot of the more casual players that do make it to endgame, as they won't be high enough in XP and they probably won't be actively trading enough to come up on the PoE.Ninja list, but a good number of them will. So this information gets scraped, it's then able to be filtered on PoE.Ninja. Ascendancy spread in 3.21 was interesting. It was the most evenly balanced we've ever seen, but it was still not evenly balanced. We had a couple of standouts, with the first one on day 10 being the Deadeye. This was the closest thing to a dominant Ascendancy, with 17% of level 95 plus characters, 20% of level 100s. Now, this is going to be much lower in patch 3.22 because Vengeant Cascade is being removed. The three lowest performing Ascendancies were Gladiator, Chieftain, and Assassin. Assassin's going to continue to be in a bad spot. Gladiator actually gets some indirect buffs this league, mostly because of the new volatility support, which works really well with a lot of builds that Gladiators might play. Also, there's a few new options for bleed. So Gladiator, I'm not counting out. I don't intend to league start it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does a bit better this league than in the past. Chieftain was the other unpopular Ascendancy in 3.21. Chieftain's being given a fresh coat of paint and is something different and new. A lot of people don't like the overall package that it's become, but I do think there is some power there. I'm probably going to league start a Chieftain myself because it's something that can play a different spin on the existing popular Righteous Fire builds while still being able to safely respec into a Righteous Fire Juggernaut if it turns out that that's what you need to do. So top build of day 10 last league was the Righteous Fire / Fire Trap build. This is usually played as a Juggernaut, occasionally played as an Inquisitor, and only at a higher budget can be played well as an Elementalist. In 3.22, I do think that we'll see some people attempting this, and some people will probably include me, on the new Chieftain Ascendancy and using Searing Bond as either a supplement to Fire Trap or as an alternative to it. I'm still to work out whether I want to use Searing Bond and Fire Trap or just Searing Bond there. Searing Bond does more damage than Fire Trap, but it can be a little bit clunky, so it's a balancing act that we'll have to work out which one is better. There were not very many level 100s with Righteous Fire / Fire Trap, but I don't think that's because the build isn't strong. It's because people were respecking out of it. It's something a lot of people play to get themselves well established in a league, then transition out to something that is new and different and shiny. Second most popular build early on was Lightning Arrow in 3.21. This is being nerfed really hard, and I don't think I want to recommend it. I don't think it's that you can't league start it. It's just that the loss of Vengeant Cascade is going to really hurt you on single target, and returning projectile support isn't so good that it makes up for this. So Lightning Arrow will still be a build, but I'm expecting it to fall several steps down the ladder as to how popular a build it is. All other Vengeant Cascade builds I think are pretty much dead, with the exception maybe of Ice Shot. Ice Shot will probably continue to exist, but will not be central to the meta. At least that's my early prediction. Boneshatter was the next most popular build, mostly played on Juggernaut, often played on Slayer. This is a very, very solid build. It's a very solid starter. I do think that this league we might see a few people who previously have played Boneshatter instead experimenting with something that is a very thematically similar build, but is based around the new trauma support. So I think we'll still see Boneshatter being run, but we'll also see some people who might otherwise have run that going and playing some different strike build, but using trauma support to sort of build their own Boneshatter. Tornado Shot is a build that only really comes online a few days in. This is something that I do not ever recommend you league start unless you have access to a dedicated aura support character. Then it is actually fine, but you do need to have that aura support character with you all the time, otherwise your damage is going to be appalling. Tornado Shot doesn't take any significant nerfs this patch, but it is difficult to get it going. And so don't do this lightly. You need to know what you're doing in order to league start Tornado Shot, and you need to have an Aurabot with you. I think we're going to see a big fall off in Artillery Ballista because a lot of the builds that wanted to use it were also using Vengeant Cascade, and because Vengeant Cascade is being nerfed, Artillery Ballista use will be way down. Now, there was a Hexblast Mind build that exploded in popularity at the start of last league. This one was really interesting. It uses Wrathpinth Globe, which got buffed in 3.19 to very little fanfare. Now, the key story here is that this was not promoted much amongst English-speaking players in the lead up to 3.21, but it was very, very widely talked about by Korean language players. The Korean language PathOfExile community discussed this build and pretty much came to a conclusion that this was the correct League starter for 321. So this meant that in 321, if you looted a Calm's Heart, it would sell quickly to one of these people who was running one of these Wrathpinth-based Hexblast Mind builds, and they would probably be a character who was a Korean language name. That was what happened at the start of 321. Now, this build has proven itself to be solid, and now the English language speaking parts of the PathOfExile community are much more aware of it. It's not that the build wasn't known, it's just that the build was probably a bit underestimated last league. This league, I think Wrathpinth Globe is going to be very expensive because people are going to want to be using the Hexblast Mind setup, and it is incredibly, incredibly good on that build. So that's a quick look at what things look like on day 10 of last league. Let's also have a quick look at day 4, and you'll see that Righteous Fire and Fire Trap were indeed the top builds then, as well as they were on day 10. Boneshatter was next. Now Toxic Rain is next. Toxic Rain's in an interesting spot. It's regaining one of the Sanctum uniques that's really good on it. It's the balance of Terror with Wither after you cast Despair. That is really, really good for Toxic Rain builds. However, Toxic Rain does tend to be something that players run days 1, 2, 3, 4, and then respec out of once they've got themselves a few hundred chaos or maybe a couple of thousand chaos. At that point they say, you know what, I don't want to play this build anymore. I want to respec into the character that I actually want to play. Lightning Arrow, Artillery, Ballista, and Hexblast we've already covered. Vortex, the cold damage over time build, is still looking fine next league, but again, this is something people tend to respec out of. It tends to be something that does really well very, very early in the game, but then does tend to fall off a little bit later on. It's not that it's a build that's not capable of running high-end content, it's just that it's a character that most people aren't running a large amount of high-end content on, because they generally tend to respec to something that's a little bit faster. And Vortex is the same build as Creeping Frost a lot of the time. I'll just point out that of the people who were playing Creeping Frost in the Crucible expansion early on, almost all of them were actually playing a Vortex build, but there is a different Creeping Frost build. It's pretty off meta at the moment, but it does function, and that is a build that scales completely differently, focusing on the hit component of Creeping Frost. Not really a popular choice right now, but it does have some legs, and it is something that a couple of people will play. We have Venom Gyre next, which is one of the best level 1 to 90 skills in the game, but something that does tend to fall off a bit more in red maps. Venom Gyre is still a good skill, and it's something that you can still say is a safe league starter choice, especially if you've played it before and you like it. Summon Raging Spirit is going to be really good in the Sanctum content, it always has been. Even with the new 100 unit immunity that's being put in place, you can easily be within 100 units of a monster in the Sanctum and have your SRSs do all of the work for you. Corrupting Fever is another League Start option that is reasonably solid. It is something that does tend to have extreme difficulty getting its own Void Stones, so consider this more of an option in trade enabled when you are willing to buy a Void Stone carry service, because you'll probably need it on Corrupting Fever. It's not that you can't do Void Stones with it, it's just that the most efficient way is going to be to get someone else to do them for you. Then we have Spark, which is something I've seen a lot more discussion of this league as a potential league starter. And especially with the new Guardian coming out, the new Guardian looks like it has a lot going for it for Spark as well. In fact, it looks like both the Inquisitor and the Guardian are phenomenal options if you want to play Spark this league. And then there's a number of other options that round out 1% and up. Explosive Arrow, which is usually played with Ballista and will be just fine this league. Frostblades, which is the second best melee skill in the game at the moment. Exsanguinate and Blade Vortex. Now there is Reap. Reap is something that has lost one of its existing builds. The old Chieftain had some synergy with Reap that the new Chieftain does not, but both the new Guardian and the existing Inquisitor have a fair bit of synergy there, so that's going to still see play. Blade Vortex has some potential things to explore in conjunction with Sacrifice support, although that's something we're going to have to play around with and work out exactly what the interaction between these gems is, because if it is the best case scenario, then Blade Vortex Sacrifice will probably be one of the builds of the league, but it might be that it's not. Okay, so what about new things that have been empowered by 3.22? I'll just start by commenting that on all of the ailment melee support gems that are available now, there's a number of them that are being added this league. None of them have absolutely won me over as this is definitively a strong league starter that I can recommend to everyone, but that doesn't mean that none of them can be league started. It's just that none of the path of buildings that I've seen for them look fantastic as yet. I do expect that that'll change over the next day or so. There's still 30 odd hours until league start, and during that period it wouldn't surprise me if someone comes up with something really good. There is a lot of support for the new Guardian. The new Guardian looks phenomenal. 3 free auras is a lot, even if the uptime isn't 100%, and especially when those auras are gem level 27.5. This is particularly good with fast-hitting physical skills, including physical skills that convert, for example, Absolution. Absolution looks phenomenal with the new Guardian, and I do think that Spark has a lot of potential with the new Guardian as well. Even though it doesn't start physical, so it doesn't get full benefit from Hatred, you can always convert your lightning damage into cold, and then get all the benefits of both Wrath and Hatred, so there's a lot of potential there. Also, the new Guardian can probably do some interesting things with Trinity support. I think there'll be a lot of discussion about ways that you can most effectively use that over the next few days. From the Chieftain perspective, I think the most interesting thing with the Chieftain is going to be Righteous Fire and Searing Bond. You're going to have less damage against Pinnacle bosses than a Juggernaut would have. A Juggernaut would be resist stripping through Curses, through Wave of Conviction, through Scorch, whereas the Chieftain is just going to overwrite those resists to 0, but where you're going to have better outcome is against giga tanky rares. Whether this be a rare monster or a map boss that has had its resistances increased 160% by a Searing Exarch altar, or whether it be a rare monster that's just rolled 2 particular mods on it that both augment its fire resist, all of these monsters that are the ones that are horrible for Juggernaut Righteous Fire to take down, because you can double curse them, you can Wave of Conviction them, and they still end up overcapped on resistances, well, these will be the ones that the Chieftain will do faster. So that's its strengths and its weaknesses, and it's something I'm interested in exploring. In terms of other things that are new this league, there is definitely going to be a couple of melee Ignite builds that get going. Whether they're any good or not is an open question. I think there is a fair bit of potential there. There's a fair bit of support in this patch for Bleed, both from the incredibly questionable Sadism support gem, which is going to provide a tremendous boost in damage per second, but at the expense of meaning you need to hit 9 times as often in order to sustain that DPS. I don't think it's worth it, but some people will disagree and some people will make it work. And there's also Volatility support, which is going to make lightning-based attacks much better, and is also going to make physical bleed builds a lot better as well. But my advice here is maybe don't league start these. These will be things to potentially explore a little bit later in the league, once you're well established and once you're able to jump over some of the gear hurdles that these sorts of builds are likely to face early on. So there's a lot of new things to think of, but the summary is that any 3.21 league starter that did not quickly go for Vengeant Cascade looks like it will still be fine in 3.22, as well as that there's a few new options on top of that. I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal Orbs and your league start have interesting results.